year, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Hern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Tai, it's always good to see you here. I'm sure it feels nice and refreshing to come home. But, in an increasingly interconnected global community, access to free digital trade is critical to U.S. economic growth and innovation. And preventing digital trade barriers has historically, and it's always been bipartisan. It's also a requirement of the 2015 Bipartisan Congressional Trade Priorities and Accountability Act, and which directs USTR to, quote, ensure that governments refrain from implementing trade-related measures that impede digital trade in goods and services, restrict cross-border data flows, or require local storage or processing of data, end quote. Yet USTR has continuously failed to protect digital trade. USTR pulled back on its support for digital trade protections at the WTO, sidelined digital trade negotiations in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework deal, and most recently failed to include digital trade barriers in the 2024 National Trade Estimate report on foreign trade barriers. The internet and digital technologies have revolutionized commerce, enabling businesses of all sizes to access global markets and consumers like never before. However, this potential is being undermined by the rise of digital trade barriers imposed by some of our trading partners. These barriers come in various forms, from data localization requirements to discriminatory regulations and censorship measures. They not only stifle innovation and economic growth, but also undermine the competitiveness of American businesses in the digital age. An increasing number of U.S. trading partners are adopting digital restrictions modeled after Chinese laws that hurt American workers and impede foreign market access of U.S. exports, which is why I was greatly concerned to see USTR fail to include the majority of these restrictions in this year's NTE. USTR stated that these exclusions only apply to any barrier that is an effort to regulate in the public interest, ceding these protections to the interests of foreign governments who would undermine the success of American companies, and as a result, the people they employ, is simply unacceptable. Ambassador Tai, will you commit to us today to revisit this issue and to publish a supplement to the 2024 NTE report relisting the barriers that were improperly deleted?
Mr. Hern, let me explain to you our approach to the National Trade Estimates report. First of all, let me just say I appreciate the scrutiny of the report, which I don't know that the NTE has ever gotten this much play in the public discourse. Thanks to everyone who's talking about it. I hope that you're also reading it, because we produce this report as a statutory requirement every single year. It is a tremendous commitment of USTR and US government resources, and it ought to be read. So I'm going to take this opportunity to explain the development of the NTE over time. When you look at the requirement for the NTE to be created, it is about listing and articulating significant trade barriers that U.S. stakeholders face in our major export markets. It's about looking for opportunities to improve and to overcome export restrictions to our exporter opportunities. Over time, the NTE has become a very, very large catalog of complaints that haven't actually gotten much scrutiny. What we did this year was begin a process of asking our teams to look at the NTE entries and to first ask, the barrier that's being discussed, is it actually a barrier? Do we actually export the product that is of concern? And then also with respect to digital, whether the measure that's being complained about is being erected as a barrier, or if it's a regulatory measure that, frankly, we see a lot of bills in Congress trying to address.
Madam Ambassador, if I may reclaim this, I've got one more question I want to ask you regarding the digital commerce. Thank you for your work on that. And obviously, we have people of grave concern. We don't simply make up things up here. I mean, maybe some do, but we're trying to make sure that we're competitive in the future. The WTO estimates that digitally enabled services accounted for 54% of the global services export in 2022, but as digital trade and digitally enabled services increase, so did the proposed regulations. India, Indonesia, and other U.S. trade partners have proposed adoption of customs duties on electronic transmissions, and an issue of great concern for me and many of my colleagues. Do you agree that the country should impose customs duty on electronic transmissions? And if so, what is your office doing to make the e-commerce moratorium at the WTO permanent?
So the e-commerce moratorium was created in 1998. I talked a little bit earlier about how the U.S. trade policy approach to data issues really began in 2000 when we thought about data as simply a facilitator for traditional trade transactions, and how that's no longer true, that data has become actually where the action is itself. On the e-commerce moratorium, there's a similar stuck-in-time element. It was developed at a time when we talk about electronic transmissions because the relevant transmission was about fax transmissions. The e-commerce transmission related to the technological world where we were still faxing information to each other. And what developed was a norm, a promise of WTO members to each other to say we weren't going to try to impose duties on those transmissions, even though to this day we're not really sure how you would impose a duty on a transmission that you can't see or touch. But as it is now 2024. So, almost, I'm going to do my math, 26 years later, right? Just the reality that we are living in is so far advanced. And so I would just say we have extended the e-commerce moratorium for another 2 years. At the WTO, in terms of the project for WTO reform and modernization, part of it relates to this conversation, which is for those WTO members who do not want to renew the moratorium. I think we need to really challenge them to articulate what is it that they are trying to accomplish. And how does it relate to the moratorium? Because I'm not sure that it does. But there is actually an evolution in just policy debate, policy development at the WTO that is stuck in time that's reflected in this particular effort. And I think that this is one of the areas of WTO reform that we're very committed to. This issue does implicate
Ambassador Tai, we're already over 2 minutes over, so I apologize.
Thank you for that, yes.